How's everybody doing today? Wow, man, my voice. So I thought we'd get started. My name is Andy Lagarde. I am the Senior Account Manager for SharkPro Software. Welcome to the Microsoft PPM Total Cost and Benefit Workshop and Discovering Your ROI. So I'd like just to sort of kick us off with a couple of key pieces of information for us first, and that is I'd like to make this interactive, so if you have questions, please don't hesitate to call out if you see anything up here or want some additional information. In an effort to make it interactive, I'm also going to be throwing some questions back to you guys. I'd like to get a better understanding of the group, the dynamics of the group, some of the reasons that you're looking at a project portfolio management tool. What are you using today? What are some of the challenges you're facing? Because I think what we've seen in our industry from a partner perspective is that you're not alone, right? We've worked with hundreds of different customers throughout the United States, throughout the world, basically, and a lot of organizations are suffering through the same type of issues that you're facing today, and so it's sort of nice to know that you're not alone in the world from that perspective. So we'll start off with just a couple of quick questions so I can understand this. From a quick show of hands, how many folks are considering Microsoft Project Server 2010 from a deployment perspective? So not so much a partner or a deployment partner, but here specifically looking at tools to see whether or not this is the right fit for your organization. Don't put your hands down. I'm going to make you keep them up till they get real tingly, and then you have to put them down. So of those of you that have your hands up today, right now, how many of you have an enterprise project management solution in play at your organization today? So it's getting down. And of those of you that have it, do you have 2010? Does anyone have 2010, Microsoft Project Server 2010 installed? 2007? Has anyone installed or is using the Portfolio Server, Project Portfolio Server 2007, Microsoft acquired? Wow, Microsoft must love you over there. You have all three? Did I see that? Portfolio Server, Project Server, and even Project Server 2010? You have it, but you haven't implemented it. Great. One of the things I'd like to just sort of throw out, have you guys sort of yell back to me, and I can speak to it if we want, but what are some of the reasons that you're looking at a project portfolio management tool today? What are some of the challenges that you're facing in your organization? I know it's early, but I promise you won't be alone if we hear some of the issues that you have. So, yes. Prioritization and being able to understand what the capacity is to take on more work. Bang for your buck in the organization. Anyone else have that same issue? Trying to understand what capacity and demand is and what are the right projects to kick off on? Yeah, see? Anything else? Yeah. Collaboration and visibility, exactly, right? So if you're working in a siloed environment, it's difficult to share information, understand that. What about that collaboration, working together as a team and understanding what's going on? Yeah, right? Same thing. Anything else? Sure. Resource management. I thought that would be one of the first ones that we heard. Resource management. Any issues with resource management across the organization? Yeah. Others? Yes. Reporting and executive visibility. Yeah, it's huge, right? Reporting, being able to get reports on time, accurate reports that reflect the true nature of the business so you can start making decisions. These are all good reasons to look at an enterprise portfolio management tool. And that's why I think you're all here today, right, to look at the Microsoft tool and see what's going on from there. So what I plan to capture or talk about today is what is PPM. I can tell you from a partner perspective, there are a lot of different ideas of what that is. What are the analysts saying about project portfolio management? What does it mean to you as an organization? Understanding the cost of doing business today. And then what are some of the ROI considerations and how do you present that information back to your organization? Does that sound like a good agenda to go after? All right. So far, so good, right? Whew. So before I do that, a little background on who I am and about our organization. My name, I mentioned, is Andy Lagarde. I work for SharkPro Software. SharkPro Software is a a full project portfolio management consulting organization. So we help organizations to design and deploy practical enterprise solutions around project portfolio management, whether that is going from a desktop environment to an enterprise environment, or maybe migrating from a prior version to a current version, or even moving from one type of software solution to another. Throughout the years that we've been doing business, we've noticed that a lot of organizations that are going from a standalone environment to an enterprise environment have very similar requirements, right? We just did that little quick exercise here. Resource management, demand management, portfolio analysis, reporting. And so what we've done is we've pre-configured Project Server 2010 end to end with over 50 different reports, over 20 different work requests, as well as workflow, custom fields, etc. And so what we're able to do with our solution is to install Project Server and its components, provision our pre-configured environment, and then map your requirements to what we've done. Now, I've never in my time at SharkPro seen anyone use all 50 reports out of the gate, but I have seen them start with something, and then as they start using the tool, look for more information along those lines. We do have a full project management complement, so everything from PMI certified classes to custom user training. And then we do, obviously, consulting as well, everything from helping you to develop your strategic drivers to staff augmentation as well. Before coming to SharkPro, I worked for Microsoft as a solution specialist out in the Northeast for 5 or 6 years or so, and have been using the Microsoft project tools for a lot longer than I'd like to admit right now. So what I'd like to do, sort of break the ice, I have a quick project manager joke that I found on the web the other day. It may make you leave, and that's fine too, but hopefully you can stick around after here. I will only do one, I promise. So a software engineer, a hardware engineer, and a project manager are on loan from the corporate office to their satellite office in Miami for 6 months. Every day, they take a walk on the beach, do a little exercise, get the nice warm air. One day, they're walking on the beach, and they stumble across a lamp in the sand, and the hardware engineer picks it up, cleans it off, and a genie appears. You probably know where this is going, right? So the genie appears and says, usually I would grant you 3 wishes, but since there are 3 of you, I'll grant you each 1 wish. So the hardware engineer thinks about it and he says, I would like to live in a huge mansion surrounded by beautiful women with no money worries in the world. Poof, he's gone. The software engineer thinks about it and says, I would love to sail around the world in a huge yacht surrounded by beautiful women with no money worries in the world. Poof, he's gone. And the genie turns to the project manager and says, and what can I do for you? And he thinks about it for a minute and he says, I'd like both of them back after lunch. Right? So prioritization of your goals and objectives is very important. That's cute, right? And clean. So let's talk about why it should be important to you, right? Project portfolio management. In working with hundreds of customers over several years, I've had calls and requests from people to come in and show Microsoft Project Server from a portfolio management perspective. And when we get on site, what we typically find is there are different definitions of what is project portfolio management. I can tell you that the number one thought about project portfolio management is the ability to take siloed projects and roll them up and provide visibility from an enterprise project management perspective. When we think about portfolio management today, it's much more than that. It begins well before the project management process occurs. Sorry, I'm from Boston. I'm not used to dry air, so my lips are chapped and my throat is dry. Wait, we're recording this, right? So we think it starts well before the project management process, right? It's about being able to understand the goals and objectives of your organization, being able to have your employees and other resources inside and outside the organization think about those goals and objectives and help you to get to those goals and objectives, right? So suggest different projects or propose different projects or ideas to help you get to those goals and objectives. And then to be able to take those and to vet them through some type of analysis or review process to understand what the value is to the company. What's the cost of this? What's the return on this? How does it align to our strategic objectives? And then to vet those projects against one another, right? So you're starting to compare one project to another project, understanding the value of those projects, understanding the supply or the demand for resources, demand for funding against those projects, and then to prioritize them, stage those projects, execute against them. And a lot of times with a lot of solutions, that's where it ends. But portfolio management is about also realizing those benefits, right? So the ability to then go beyond the closure of the project and start to look at, are we getting the kind of benefit that we expected to get from this particular project or this request when we kicked it off? And what was the true cost of doing this project versus those benefits? And even how do we learn from this particular project for future projects or requests that have similar goals, objectives, or requirements in nature? So one of the things that I'd like to share with you is some details around what the analysts are saying. So we've got a number of different graphs, right? And if you've ever sat in on a project portfolio management discussion before, you'll know that roughly somewhere between 60 and 70% of all IT projects fail to realize what they were expected to realize. I think that's huge, right? And you think about all the work and the effort and all that goes into managing those projects, right? Getting them off the ground, getting them resourced, moving forward. You can see that looks like it's starting to decline as we look at 2010 and even what it looked like in 2008, right? So some of the contributions to this would be the recession, right? Or whatever the economic dip that occurred. But I think in 2010 and as we move forward, we'll see that more and more organizations are realizing the value of project portfolio management, so they're starting to see and pick on those projects that make the most sense for their organization. Questions about this slide? Anything we talked about so far? All right, I have questions for you if you're not going to question me. So then Standish, who put this report together for us, also did some additional analysis around these numbers to help us understand, is there some type of break-even point or some delineation of where projects are failing. So here we're looking at the level of effort in person months to see if there's any type of indication. And you can see, even with the smaller projects, about a quarter of those even smaller projects still have failure issues with them, right? The inability to realize the kind of benefits or the cost or the effort that is required to take that. So it's, in this particular scenario, size does not matter. And when we look at... Sure. That when you're looking at that type of effort to get those kind of projects off the ground, very seldom what you baselined as the cost and benefit is going to come true on those larger projects. None of them. Anything over 2,400 person months of effort realize the exact benefit as they started out to. Kind of scary, huh? And when you look at duration, even again, with a project that takes less than 3 months, you're still looking at a quarter of those projects that got kicked off not being able to realize those type of benefits or the cost or even get them closed, basically. What's the average duration of projects in your organization? I know it ranges all over, but there must be some type of average. And nobody has any? Go ahead, shut it up. 6 to 9 months, that's typical, absolutely. 28 months? And when you look at the projects that the folks that you sort of sit and, you can feel free to either nod or put your head down so I won't call on you, but when you think about the projects that your organization is taking on today, right, and you think about the projects that you're doing or your peers are doing in the organization, you have to know that things, we're not meeting those expectations a lot of the time, right? So there's a lot of issues that come out throughout the projects. And those issues can be addressed if you've got a full governance process in place to drive that information, right? To understand the full realization of what it's going to take to get this project done, What's it going to take? What kind of benefits can we realize from this? And I know we're talking about doing additional work in the organization, but as we go through the presentation today, I think you'll see that the benefits you get from that additional work, the additional cost, the additional effort, are going to far outweigh the work and effort that you'll have to put forward in order to get that governance process in place today. We even looked at from a team perspective. So even the size of the team, the number of full-time employees that make up those teams, still not safe to have just a small team. There's failure in a lot of the projects that we do, right? Almost a third, or roughly a third of the projects, even when the team size is smaller, have issues when you're executing against those particular projects. So what does this mean? So what it means to the U.S. is over $1 trillion in money that it's costing the economy today, right? So in the form of wasted money organizations are spending, the issues that sort of fall out of this wasted money, and we'll talk a little bit more about what are some of the repercussions of these project failures. When you look at it from a global perspective, it increases significantly to over $6 million. And when you in a recent survey, when you look at the state of the CIO report, you'll see that a lot of business leaders are still thinking that the IT department is more of a cost center than it is a profit center. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides as well, how we turn that around, right? So according to Standish, almost a third of the projects that get kicked off will be abandoned before they complete. It's going to waste about $1.2 million in the average mid-market size company. It's going to tie up about 10% of the IT staff, and they're going to cancel it. This is the part I thought was really right, is they're going to cancel it about 50% of the way through. So you're going to do all the work, all the analysis to get these projects started. You're going to assign those resources, start doing the executing against those projects, and it won't be until almost halfway through the duration of those 6 to 9 to 24-month projects that you start to realize that these projects aren't what we thought they were going to be, and they end up getting canceled. And the thing is, right, from a gut feeling perspective as project managers, you know that they're going to tank even before you kick some of them off. I know back when I looked at some of the requirements of some of the projects that we used to do way back when, you'd take a look at this and say, oh my gosh, why are we even thinking about doing this project? It benefits one person in the organization, usually higher level management person in the organization, but it just doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense at all. So what does this mean for you, right, as an organization? How does it impact your team? When you're looking at projects that are failing, right, in today's economy, whether you're looking at thinking of the economy as still in a downward trend or an upward trend, there's a lot of issues that happen with failed projects. So first off, projects that do get funded and eventually fail are wasting the resources, the funding for that, right? So money's being wasted every day on projects that don't make sense or will never come to fruition within the organization today, right? So when we put these slides together, I was thinking about what does that mean longer term from an organization perspective, right? We're wasting money. One of the things that I saw quite often when I worked for Microsoft is the inability for organizations to stay current with technologies. Now, a lot of times, the sort of running joke was, when I worked for Microsoft, was we're not going to install the software until at least the first service pack comes out so that we can make sure everything is done. But quite honestly, and that's a valid truth, don't get me wrong, I know you don't want to suffer through any type of issues that might come through that, but quite honestly, you think of your organization today, you think of your employees today, right? Do they get excited when they're on their home PC and they're using 2007 or 2010, and then they come into the office and they're using 2000, 2002, 2003? It's boring for them. It's so old, right? To them, it's like using a calculator for our kids today, right? It's awful. So when you think about the resources in your team and the people that work in your organization, right, they don't have the funds a lot of times to keep up with the new technologies. But quite honestly, it's the excitement of the new technology and the new functions of that technology that excite the resources and the people in your organization, right? And I think of, for those folks who are using 2010, right, Project 2010, Microsoft came out with the user ribbon, which brings to the surface a lot of functionality that was recently, or until that point, was hidden submenu, a few submenus down, right? So a lot of project managers couldn't find how the functionality to do things within project. 2010 brings it to light. But a lot of organizations can't fund new technology, so they're using older technology, which forces the resources on their team to continue not to take advantage of that, or not to understand or recognize the efficiency gains or the feedback from the new technology. We're dealing with staff reductions, right? Think of your organization today, right? There's probably not one organization that's represented here today that hasn't seen some type of staff reduction or layoff or hiring freeze that's occurred over the last couple of years. Now, if you weren't taking money and spending it on projects that never come to fruition or projects that don't provide the benefit back to the organization, that's money that can be reinvested in the organization, so it therefore affects the amount of spending or the amount of capital that the organizations have and how they'll manage resources and teams and move forward. You're doing more with less, right? So these are all sort of repercussions that happen because of these project failures. You're spending more money, you're not seeing the kind of return, the organization's not growing, there's doing the reductions in staff, more people are doing, less people are doing more, right, than in the organization. I think of, there's a little box in Project Server when you look at the time and task and timesheet reporting that says, do you want to provide a layer that says how much time a resource spent doing work as overtime? And I guarantee you in fact, in my experience, 100% of the time, that people laugh and say, can you even remove that from the server so you don't see that? Because we don't record, we don't manage that overtime setting in our organization today, right? It's just expected that resources will get the work done and that we're not going to be charging back what the overtime rate for all the work that needs to happen in our organization. So you're doing a lot more work with less resources. They're burning out, and people are leaving your company, right? For other companies that have new technology, that don't have the burnout. They have a good quality life balance as well. So I mean, when you think of, again, just sort of summarizing, right? You think of all the projects your organization takes on, all the work that they do, the frustration that comes with not realizing those benefits, it starts to then trickle down throughout the organization and affect you at really the heart of the organization, right? The people that do the work that keep this company running. So I captured, move it down a little further, practice my P's. So I tried to capture sort of the top 6 issues that cause most IT projects to fail, right? So the first one is the lack of prioritization. So typically there's 3 scenarios that sort of fall into this, right? So huge projects that get funded, even though everyone knows that they're not going to happen, right? They're not going to come to fruition. There's no value in them. Even when we do the demonstration of Microsoft Project Server, there's projects that you can force in, and typically, you would force in projects because of compliance issues as one main reason, right? So regulatory type of compliance reasons. But Microsoft also included an option in there to force a project in as a pet project, right? Has anyone not heard a pet project right? We all know it, we know they all happen, but we have to continue to do that, right? That's one of the main reasons that we see these big, monstrous projects get forced in. Even midway, you do the planning session. In fact, these pet projects typically don't go through the normal process, right, for them. All of a sudden, you're working along, someone knocks on your door, and they're like, I need you to get this done. And it's got to take top priority, right? And all of a sudden, it has to be forced in, and you can't stop the other projects. You just have to add it to the resources plate and hope they get them done in time without hurting anybody. The next one is first come, first serve, right, from a priority perspective. So when you're looking at prioritizing these, right, it's sort of first one in with the request. Let's get started on it before any other projects come in, and then the rest will sort of fall behind in there, right? So first come, first serve. We see a lot of that in organizations that don't have enterprise-level reporting or visibility through that. And even unclear business objectives, that the executives in the organization have a hard time communicating what the goals and objectives of the organization are, so that those people that are doing the analysis on these can actually correlate the project's value back to the business objectives, right? So if your executive team, these are our 5, 6, 7, 10 goals and objectives, but they don't have any type of value around those. So how do you prioritize those objectives? They're all important, but they can't all be equally important. Some things lend more profitability to organizations. Some of them are more requirements-based, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times we see these as not being able to communicate the objectives correctly, and so therefore it's hard to prioritize which projects you'll take on. The next one is around requirement issues, right? So this is another stumbling block. I'll give you guys time to read the Dilbert if you haven't seen it already, but it's pretty funny. This is another stumbling block, which is unclear requirements, right? So it's hard to hold an executive accountable for not having those clear objectives. Can you guys read it? Can you see it back there? Couldn't make it any bigger. You could see already it was lagging into the text up there, right? But it's hard to go back to your executive team and say, and point the finger at them and say, you haven't made it clear what the goals and objectives are, or what those prioritizations of those goals and objectives are. And so it's hard for us to understand the requirements for our project management office or the governance board. And so a lot of times it sort of stays that way because no one wants to sort of, bring that to everybody's attention, that the executives don't have that type of visibility. Next is resource issues, right? So the lack of resources to adequately do the job. So some projects, in order for them to get done, they take a look at what we think the resource requirements are. They take a look at what our capacities to do work, and then the schedules are changed, right, to fit in, to make it fit. And so it'll be done. We'll figure we'll get it done. It probably won't get done on time. It'll probably cost more money because we haven't appropriately looked at or gauged what the level of effort is from a resource perspective. Or even, miscalculating the amount of work, the analysis, or being able to use a type of tool like a portfolio management tool to reevaluate, we've done this type of work before. It's taken a lot longer than we estimated the last time, so let's learn from our past experience and put the appropriate amount of work in that particular place. The next is scheduling issues. I like this. Sorry, I came up with it. I thought it was pretty funny. But I said no to the sound in here, plugging in sound, but I thought it might be kind of fun, right? So scheduling issues, right? So again, if you don't know the prioritization of a project, you don't understand the capacity versus demand, it falls back to some of those other things we talked about. Pet project, first in, squeaky wheel, right? These are all reasons that projects get forced in that cause conflict in the organization. And one of the big issues with scheduling issues is that if I'm working on one project and then I get assigned another one, my capacity to work on that first project gets detrimented, right? So now I'm 50% on this one, 50% on that one, at best. And then a third one, now I've got even less capacity. So what happens to those projects is they start to grow, right? So if I'm taking longer to do these projects because I can only commit a certain amount of time to them, those projects' durations are going to start to continue to grow. They're going to start to overlap with other projects. And it becomes this big snowball effect. Managing risks, right? So when we talk about the ability to look at projects and understand what the risks of getting these projects done, so that you can quickly evaluate or mitigate what those risks are. So risks come up in a lot of projects, but when you're doing the analysis up front and presenting these projects, a lot of times the risks aren't identified until you're in the middle of these particular projects. And when you're looking at these risks, these are going to cause delays and issues within the projects themselves. And then poor management planning, right? So stumbling around, trying to figure out what we'll do, how we'll do it. I think poor planning is probably the biggest issue that affects the overall reason that projects fail. And there was a joint study that was done that said 89% of companies said that they do not have an integrated view of their portfolio across the organization. So again, when we talked about it a little bit earlier today, right, you're not alone with the reasons that you're looking for a portfolio management solution. There are a lot of organizations out there that are still looking for that. 22% of the firms surveyed said that they don't have a standard project management methodology for managing projects, right? So that's a huge issue. If you have a governance process, it doesn't have to be solid, set in stone, but if you have a process in place, you can start to more efficiently understand what's coming at you, be more proactive, and manage those projects moving forward. Of those who do, over 80% of their portfolio management process is mostly manual, right? So it's all done in silos, it's all done in spreadsheets, you meet on a regular basis, but there's no way of providing sort of transparency across the entire portfolio to manage that process. And then firms without a standard project management methodology saw a 21% higher failure rate than those who actually have a process in place today. Questions so far? The ability to track ROI, right? So 59% of companies have no formal benefit management process. So let's kick off this project. We can estimate what we think the schedule looks like. We can throw resources at it. We can estimate what the cost is. But how do we realize what those benefits are to the organization? Sometimes they're made up. Sometimes they're not there at all. 31% of organizations don't always have defined financial benefits. We see that a lot when we go to organizations and we talk about, are they calculating what the cost is to do these projects, or even what the benefits are going to be when they get these projects completed, and how those two compare against each other or contrast against each other. Of those who do have financial benefits, 2% claim that they achieve target benefits all of the time. So we saw that slide before with the larger projects, 100% of the time fail to achieve what their goals are. It's backed up from this particular survey as well. And if a CIO can't accurately allocate the IT costs, it costs a couple of different problems, right? First of all, financial statements are going to be distorted, and that's not good on anyone's plate. And the executive decision-making is compromised, right? So you're making decisions on things that are still up in the air or are uncertain or not accurate. So it's difficult to do. Mm-hmm.
Who's been asked, because if you're asking the sponsors of the projects, most often they say, well, the benefits were achieved.
A lot. Well, but you know, a lot of times when you ask whether or not benefits were achieved, the benefits that most organizations talk about are, did the project complete, right? Did we complete, or maybe complete on time? A lot of organizations don't take or don't have the means to track benefit realization over an extended period of time against what the cost of those projects actually, what they actually incurred from a cost perspective to move forward. Is that, you think that close, accurate? So a couple of examples, right? Then hopefully this sort of resonates. I've got two scenarios. This is, when we think about this, so this is a process that happens in a lot of organizations that don't have an enterprise solution, right? So on the first day that funding is available, everybody wants their projects to get started, right? Because who knows what's coming at? In fact, we know as the year dredges on, other things are going to be thrown in, and there's a high chance that my project will get delayed or never started or won't finish. So when we look at this, we've got two projects. Both projects want to kick off at the same time. Because I've got limited resources, I'm going to dedicate 50% of my resources on one project and 50% of those resources on the second project. Both of these projects only take 5 months to complete if we focused on them, but because we're spreading those resources out, they're now going to take 10 months to complete. So at the end of the 10-month period, both projects are done, and I get a $300,000 benefit back to the organization. 2 months at 100 and 2 months at 50. But if I can understand the real value of those projects and understand what the capacity or the demand for those resources is going to be, I can start to prioritize my projects so that I can see better benefits realization. So now I do project A and I focus all my resources on project A. We get it done in 5 months, not 10, 5 months. And because we're done in 5 months, I can then realize 7 months of benefit off of that project. So even if I don't get to project B, I've already received more benefit than if I did it by stacking those projects and just kicking them all off at the same time. Does that make sense? You guys know this, right? You live it every single day, but it's hard to put quantitative numbers on this. But I did it. Here's another thought, right? So you're managing projects. We're actively working through this process. If the average duration of your project is 9 months, and I saw a lot of head shakes, that's part of accurate, you'll do about 24 meetings over that 9-month period. The number of people on the average team is about 10 people. The duration of the meeting is about an hour. The cost of those people sitting around the table with you, fully loaded, around 60. For that hour, about 38 on average. And during this math, you'll do about 30 projects throughout the year. So just sitting there around the table in our project status meeting, finding out, where are you with this task? Where are you with that task? How did you do? You spend an hour going through that process. With those numbers, you're going to spend 7,200 hours each year sitting around getting updates from your team, and it's going to cost the organization over $275,000 for those updates. If you've got an automated project portfolio management tool in place, a lot of the tools today, especially Microsoft Project Server 2010, allow you to have the team members update you directly throughout the week on what their status is on those particular tasks. So if I assign a task to Steve, and he comes back to me by the end of the week and says, I finished the task on time, when we get into this room, I'm not going to say, Steve, where are you with that task? What I am able to do is first of all, probably cut some time off of this meeting and give people some time back in their day. But even more importantly, if you don't do that, you can start to proactively manage the task instead of reactively manage the work, right? So I know that I assigned work to Steve. It was supposed to be 3 days. It's now 8 days later, and he still hasn't finished the work. I can start to look at that and mitigate what those issues are so that we can be more proactive and focus on how we get rid of that issue or how it affects the overall plan and how we communicate that moving forward. Does that make sense? Okay. For the record, everyone nodded. The other thing, too, that portfolio management tools do is around reporting, right? I think we saw someone said reporting is a big, important factor for that. So, again, same type of scenario, right? Number of project managers, 10. Number of projects per project manager, 6. I put 2 hours to consolidate the reports, and I'll tell you why I put that in there. The average cost of that is, if you're not making $100K, I don't want to hear about it later in the presentation. And the number of reports throughout the year are about 42. And in typical organizations that we work with, as a project manager, I have to consolidate my projects into a PowerPoint presentation. So does every other project manager in the group. And in some organizations, then someone gets them, an administrator gets them, and has to consolidate those reports into one packet that is then presented to the executive team. And in a lot of organizations, they dedicate a full-time person to doing that work. Right? So if you think about the amount of effort and time it takes to just get the information to the team, that's a lot. In fact, that effort equates to over 5,000 hours and about 241,000 given these numbers. Right? And the thing is, when we talk to people that do this, those full-time equivalents that are employees that are doing this work, no sooner do they get their report package done, and then they have to start hounding the project managers for the next week. So what that means is the data I got on one day, 4 days ago, is no longer up to date, right? So the management team, when they get this packet and then they have the chance to look at it, they're looking at old data, right? And you think about that from a cost perspective, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, no way, there's no way we should continue this project. It's way off course. It's costing us more money. By the time we get to a point where I've realized that and we were able to meet with that, it's weeks have gone by with that project still working, right? So the people are still working on that project. We're still throwing money at a project that is no longer providing value or is way off course. Questions? Oops, went the wrong way. So low value projects. This was the toughest for me to equate back to you as far as what the cost of a low value project is. So I just took a demo project that we have in Project Server and threw it out there, right, as an example. But I think if you think in your organization about the projects that you do, and you think about a project that in your gut added very little or no value to the organization, but you did it anyway, or a project that you worked on for, we said 9 months, right? Take any project that you worked on for 9 months, whether you finished it or not, and think about what the cost and what the cost was from a resource perspective to get that work done. You can quickly come up with a value of what doing a low value project is to the organization, right? So in this case, I mean, this is probably at least a 2-year project from a process perspective. But those numbers add up quickly when you're talking about human resource costs to the organization to do projects that either won't come to fruition or add very little value to the organization. So how do you formalize your process, right? So considerations that you have to include, or you should include, is selecting projects for the pipeline. So that whole selection process, right? This is before project management takes place. This is when you're trying to figure out what's the process that we'll go through in order for us to consider this project over this other project, or what the value of those projects are going to be, or what kind of resources do we need. Do we use templates to help us through that process? Or do we just do do we go start from scratch time after time after time for these projects? So you definitely want to consider, again, from a portfolio management perspective, what projects you're going to select, how you'll select those projects throughout the process or the life cycle of those project requests. You want to also consider maintaining the projects in the pipeline, right? So a lot of organizations, we talked about it, a lot of organizations kick off a project and no matter what it takes, we're going to finish this project because we consider success finishing a project. Even if at the end of that project, we're not going to do anything more. We're not going to use the product. It's not going to add value. But we did a project from start to finish, and so that to us is a successful value, right? So looking at not only what projects are coming at you, but also what projects are in our pipeline today at various stages of execution, and how do we compare new projects against existing projects, right? They're all vying for the same resources, they're all vying for the same funding, and in some cases, some projects that have been going on long enough, people have forgotten that they're even being worked on, and a new project idea comes in that is the same project as other projects, right? Delivering the same value, delivering the same kind of deliverables. And so you've got two projects that do the same thing, but because one has been going on and on and on, and it's forgotten about. You know, it's a graph. It's part of a graph that you put in that PowerPoint presentation on a regular basis. You also want to think about how you execute that process, right? So putting together a formal process, a formal governance process on executing that whole project portfolio management. How do we get the ideas in from our team? How do we evaluate those ideas? How do we vet them against other ideas of similar nature, or look at them from a funding perspective, or look at them from a resource perspective? How do we prioritize those projects throughout this process? And then tool selection. So we saw in one of the prior slides that a lot of organizations today, I think it was in the 80%, don't have a tool that covers the end-to-end project portfolio management lifecycle. So a lot of the work is being done manually. Without that, we talked a little bit around the reporting, right, and the consolidation. So the data you're getting today is a week old. And by the time you have a chance to look at it and react to it, it's probably 2 weeks old. So having a tool that provides real-time information and transparency throughout the organization is going to help you with this process immensely. So tool selection, right? First thing you want to consider is what are you investing in, And we talk a lot about this when we talk with customers who are evaluating multiple tools. Here's a quote from CAPGEMINI regarding the release of Microsoft Project 2010, and I think it sums it up very nicely. But what it says specifically is that when you're investing in Microsoft Project Server 2010, you're not just buying a PPM tool, but you're building off of a platform, right? A platform that provides much more than just a PPM tool. And when you think about the objectives of an IT organization, it's not about having a tool that does this, and another tool that does that, and another tool that does this, and another tool that does that, and all the resources I need to administer this tool, that tool, this tool, that tool. And then at the end of the day, half of them don't talk to each other. So now I've got to get a report here and a report there and consolidate it on a PowerPoint presentation and provide that information. The Microsoft Project Server 2010 solution is a platform that has dynamic project portfolio management capabilities, but it's much more, right? You could have dashboards that provide information on anything from blogs that occur, what's happening from a support perspective, what's happening with your downtime on your servers. And it can work with your organization and the roles that your organization has, right? So I don't want to, as a resource, a team resource, I don't necessarily need to know the downtime or the uptime of our servers. But as a CIO, I might want to see like a portal that has different graphs that when I start my day, I can look at and see what happened overnight from an uptime perspective. What are we looking at from a capacity versus demand perspective of my team? Are we utilizing our resources appropriately? How are we doing on those projects that mean the most to us? You know, how am I going to manage my day? And so a lot of the project portfolio management tools that we talk about out there, whether they be Primavera or Clarity or some of the other pieces that are out there, they're project portfolio management tools, and they stand alone, and then you have to try to integrate them with other tools that help provide that visibility. But with Project Server 2010, it's a platform that you can develop off of and expand as your organization grows. Another piece is the Gartner's market scope. So Gartner does an analysis. You may have sat in on a couple of their sessions. I know they had at least one. And they put out a new market scope analysis of where Microsoft fits. And you can see very easily that, because I highlighted, in fact, when I first did this, they were like pulsating, but I thought maybe that might hypnotize you and put you to sleep. So I stopped that from happening. But you can see that we're looking at Microsoft as a strong positive in the market scope analysis. And I point back to the prior discussion with the other tools that are here are PPM tools versus a platform that you can develop off of. And when you look at the cost of this, you'll see when you look at the other tools out there that Microsoft's solution fits very nicely from that perspective. The other solutions that are out there are SaaS solutions, and I can tell you from experience that organizations that are deploying these SaaS solutions today will hit a ceiling. You'll hit a ceiling because what happens is you have a process today, and you'll take your process and you'll put it into a tool and you'll automate some of the functionality, get some efficiencies from that. But as soon as people see what that tool can do, they're going to want more. And to want more, you've got to have more functionality, right? You've got to have more governance to get that process done. And so what happens is these SaaS solutions are great for a year or two, and then all of a sudden you've hit a ceiling on what their capabilities can do without doing, full customization or taking over the solution completely. And so now, 2 years down the road, you've got to look at another solution and retrain your entire team on how that new solution will work, all the change management that goes through that, and all the cost that's associated with that as well. So SaaS solutions are good. I'm not saying that because we offer one, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the typical SaaS solution, when we talk about the other players that are in the market scope position, I make a living off organizations that go to those tools and then want to migrate to a tool that can grow with them once they hit that mark, that benchmark. I should say I make a good living off of that, but I don't want to make everyone jealous. The other piece too, when we look at some of the other components of this, the other tools out there like the Clarity tools and the Primavera tools, when you start to compare the cost of those tools over time, those other tools also carry annual maintenances as well, right? So Microsoft Project Server has a number of different ways that you can license it and own the solution as well. But with the other tools, you'll find that you have to pay annual maintenances on those tools, which over a 3 to 5 year payback period starts to make them look less attractive, right? And again, you're talking about a PPM tool, not a platform you can build off and develop and continue to grow within the organization itself. The one piece that, it probably sounds biased, being a partner of Microsoft, is to partner with an expert when you're looking to deploy the tool, right? So there's a lot of partners here in this room as well as at this conference. And one of the things that you'll hear from Microsoft and some of the customers out there is when you're looking to deploy a project portfolio management tool, there's a lot of functionality you have to consider, right? You think about the project management process and all of the complexity that your organization goes through to figure out what projects to take on, how to prioritize those projects, looking at resource management, understanding capacity and demand and mapping those skills, et cetera. And so we strongly recommend that you look to an expert to provide that visibility, right, to provide that functionality. I had a customer recently do an evaluation of what it would take for them to deploy to an organization. I believe it was around 200 users in the organization itself. And so they looked at the cost of what it would take for them to deploy it internally versus what it would take to have a partner deploy it. You'll see the bottom line numbers listed here for one thing. A couple other things that were more narrative is the fact that they don't have time to spend this much effort on this tool because they've got so much going on in the organization today. And so we go back to that model of doing one resource, doing 10 jobs, and splitting that out, and what you end up having is a delay, right? So now you're delaying this and all the other projects that need to be considered as well. And what's the cost of not being able to get those projects done on time and realize benefit, or even this project especially, since we're talking about it. Questions? Yes?
Explain what that chart says, basically. It says $87,000 some odd dollars. Is that the cost for them to do the project?
That's their estimated savings, actually.
Oh, the savings.
The savings for them.
Someone like you do it versus themselves.
Exactly, yes.
That's
Yeah.
the savings.
Correct. So they looked at the internal cost of their resources. So you're talking about SharePoint server administrators, SQL administrators, the project management office, and all the teams that need to be involved in that process as well. And that was the savings over, I want to say, over 3 years that they realized. Because they thought that when they looked at this, they said that they could probably get this in over a course of about 12 to 14 months. It would take them to install Project Server 2010 to the requirements of the organization. Yes?
What was the alternative time besides 12 to 14?
With our organization, less than 4 weeks for the 250 people.
And again, going back to that standards data, how big an organization was this? 500 people in IT, 1,000?
So this initial deployment was to about 250 people initially, and 250 users. But it was the expectation working with our organization was that it would grow to about 500 to 600 people over time. So it's starting out with IT and then spread through the different business units of the organization once they started to hear about it. In fact, I think you'll see if you've ever done or had a demonstration and you introduce the tools to other parts of the business unit, they're very excited about it. A lot of times we hear the biggest challenge that IT organizations have is to control the flow of information out to the business world because they want that visibility of what's going on. In fact, I started with Microsoft because I did an evaluation of different tools out there. I was working for Lifeline Systems. Help, I fall and I can't get up. Lifeline back in the day was taking 350,000 button pushes a year from people across the United States who were looking for assistance or to talk to somebody. So we had numerous projects that were going on from an IT perspective, from telecommunications, infrastructure, et cetera. And I would go and sit in on these IT meetings every Friday morning, and I would walk away thinking, I don't know anything more around when my project is going to be done than when I came into this meeting today, right? I would hear why they couldn't get it done. I would hear all the things they had, but I'd walk out and there would be nothing. I'd walk out with nothing except a jelly donut and a cup of coffee, basically, sponsored by the IT to keep me happy so I wouldn't raise a stink. And so I started looking at these portfolio management tools to say, how do we provide better visibility to our organization? So looping this story back to what I'm talking about is, the business units are dying to have that information, but they believe that it's not available, it can't be had. And as soon as they start to see it is available, they see how that type of information can benefit them, and how not only do they need it from getting IT information, but how they can start to use it as well in their own business unit. Yes?
One last question. Without trying to read an eye chart,
Yeah.
is this all just a make versus buy analysis, or does it include lost opportunity costs? If you take 4 weeks versus 12 to 14 months,
Yeah.
there's a huge opportunity cost loss for whatever the economic benefit was of the system.
Right. Was not factored into this. That was not factored into this.
This opportunity cost was not included in those numbers. That's a make internally versus buy from you or someone else.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, which brings me to my shameless plug. So I'll just go back and tell you about it. I mentioned it earlier, right? So Project Server 2010, typical deployment is to come in and take your requirements as an organization, then to build the tool, right? To put in the different roles and the different requirements that your organization has. Then it's to configure the tool, right? Build those reports, build those workflow processes, understand what the requirements are, and then to configure the tool, and then to map your resources. So Andy is this type of resource and has this type of security and permissions. So that's the standard approach, and there's a great spot. We do it as an organization, but as I mentioned earlier, we also have the pre-configured end-to-end solution. And so what we do is remove a lot of the work that needs to be done to build the tool, and end up just provisioning it in your environment, and then mapping your requirements to this tool. So 50 plus reports. Most organizations use about 21 different reports out of that 50, and you have the ability, we just map what your requirements are to that particular tool. Shameless plug, only took a minute of time. But I am willing to talk more about it if you're interested. All day long. So reporting back to the organization. Right, first thing is to do the math, right? So, in fact, I'm going to build this. So first is to do the math, right? Think about the cost of doing business today, right? I showed you a couple of slides. What's it take to sit in those status meetings, right? What's the cost of doing those status meetings? What's the cost of getting those updates onto a PowerPoint presentation and consolidating them with others? What's the cost of a project that failed to realize or come to fruition in the organization itself? Just get some basic numbers together for your team. I strongly suggest you solicit input from other members of your organization as well. If you're coming at this as a sole person against this, you may or may not get sponsorship. But if you also have other business units that are looking for value from a tool like this, you're going to have a lot more weight on your side as you go forward with this. I also recommend that you don't just point out the problem, right? Don't just go to your boss and say, hey, there's an issue. Now you've got to solve it because I put it on your plate, right? Think about putting together some information around what's available out there to solve these issues, right? I mean, I have a couple of slides on here, and they're going to be yours as soon as you want them, around if we have this kind of tool, this is the kind of benefit we can see, or we can get rid of these issues and move forward with that. And then get executive sponsorship. I think that that's an extremely important piece. And as I think about it, in the way that I looked at it back at my Lifeline days, was I looked at this as sort of buddying up to an executive in our organization, one of the VPs in our organization, and we jointly worked on this and presented it, right? So I get credit from that person that I'm bringing this information, this issue up, and not only an issue, but a resolution and a benefit to the company. And that person gets the benefit of sponsoring this and bringing it up as well. It's a win-win for you, for the sponsor, and for the organization itself. So don't be afraid, well, most organizations, don't be afraid of losing that. The other piece that I just sort of bring up as a thought, right? When you're talking to the executive team and you're talking about project portfolio management, you want to talk about what the true measures of success are, right? Think in terms of the way that they think. So typically, because we're so entrenched in project management, we think of success as on scope, on time, under budget, quality's been hit. And those are all very important from a project perspective. But when you think about portfolio management, project portfolio management, that's a strategic directive, right? That's bigger than, hey, if we do this, our projects will come in on time. Because probably if they hired the right project managers, they are anyway. So you're going to be bringing something to the boss saying, hey, if we do this, our projects will come in on time. He's like, hey, if you don't bring your projects in on time, I'll fire you. There's no real benefit to me to now spend a few $1,000s on bringing the tool in. But when you change it and talk about what portfolio management will do and tie it back to what the key objectives, what those senior level managers are thinking about, it's around profitability, right? We'll deliver more projects on time. They'll be the right projects for our organization. We'll be able to tie the cost of doing business with the return of that business that we're doing. We'll be able to start to realize those benefits long after the project has been executed and closed, because we're still tracking that and understanding what are the factors that cause the realization to either come to fruition or not. And also opportunity, right? So first to market. In organizations that do product development, if they've got all this other work going on in their organization, it's going to impede the way they get products out the door or how quickly you can get that work done. So these are very important pieces of information when you're talking to the executive team to keep in mind as you're building your business case for the portfolio management tool. Yeah, I like this because it's incorrectly attributed to me, but it's really from Anthony Robbins. So if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got, right? So if you continue to manage work in the portfolio the way that you're doing it today, you're always going to get the same results, right? It's when you start to step back from the situation and start to look at more holistically, more strategically how you address which projects to take on, how those projects will compare to other projects, how you prioritize those projects, staff those projects, fund those projects, so that you can start to realize those benefits, right? That slide where I had 2 projects and I got $400,000 in return versus $800,000 if I staffed those correctly. These are things that if you change the way you're doing things, you'll start to see changes in the organization. Then I have a couple other quotes from a couple of organizations you may have heard of. But I think as we flip through these, what you're going to notice is that more and more organizations are realizing the benefit of project portfolio management. And very shortly, those organizations are going to be moving to a more process-driven, governance-driven methodology in those organizations. And those companies that are doing it now are the companies that will come out ahead in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, right? And we all want our company to succeed. We want our company to be the one that gets there first. And that's what you're really driving at, right? Is the ability to get there before the other customers do, before your competition does, so that you realize those benefits. You're a more profitable organization. You're not losing resources, you're gaining resources. You're getting to market first. And that's my presentation. Questions? Yes?
Talk about the cost of doing everything manual, adding up the numbers.
Yes.
But how about when setting up a system like this, what's the size of the PMO or the additional people that you need to hire to manage this and support this? That could be a management concern also, that we build up some bureaucracy for managing all this, and it's just all set so on time, and we don't want to go down that path.
So it's a good question. It's about managing or administering this whole process, right? This new technology in the organization today. And unfortunately, like a lot of questions I answered from a sales perspective, it depends on your organization today, right? So do you use SharePoint today, your organization? If you do, you probably have a SharePoint administrator on site or on location for that, right? So some of the requirements are going to be taken care of from a SharePoint perspective, right? Project server, I mean, just as a real-life example, our typical deployment or engagement includes training for project server administrators, and it's typically 2 days, and it covers everything from security and permission, adding resources, changing level of that resource, backing up, archiving, deleting projects, etc. And if you think about the tool itself, a lot of times what you see is there's a lull, right? You get it, you work through your requirements, you configure the tool, you test it, you roll it out, people are using it, they're gathering feedback and thoughts around what they like or don't like, and it's usually somewhere around 6 to 9 months that you start to see feedback from the management team that's great, but now let's look at this. And that's where that comes into play. The size of the group, the size of your organization, the people that are using it, and how often, how big those projects all come to factor into this. But I would say, our average deployment for our software is somewhere between, 250, 500 users. And for that size of a group, you're probably looking at one full-time administrator for the solution in the typical deployment. If you've got a SharePoint administrator, usually, it depends on the size of your organization again. Sometimes you have multiple SharePoint admins. That could be part of the responsibility of the SharePoint admin as well. But again, the tool itself is configured to your requirements of the organization if it's done correctly. And so it's really just looking at, changing the resources as they move in or out of the organization and their level of security and permission, and then backing up the data on a periodic basis, which usually falls within something that's being done already as well. Yes?
If I could just add one thing, we see a lot of organizations with that same question.
Yeah.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. A lot of organizations don't go through some of the things that Andy mentioned initially around planning and defining requirements and getting responsible and building that roadmap. We're right to implementing the tool, and they're spending more time on the back end,
Right.
supporting it, dealing with issues, trying to escalate issues and things like that. So ultimately, the level of planning you put in up front is directly in relation to how much time it takes in the back end to support.
Yes.
Actually, my question is directly related on the conversation we're having right now. So, one point you mentioned the turnaround time to look at a pre-configured solution.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked a lot about what it takes to get the requirements for a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the Shark Pro approach, how do you ensure that the quality of the requirements you've gotten from the client is what you need, so they're going to be successful on day two?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, how do we ensure that the requirements we get from the client are correctly mapped to the solution itself, right? If I got that correctly, more or less? Yeah. So there's a couple of different things that factor into that. The first piece is, from an end perspective, is around testing, making sure that the solution does exactly what you're looking for. Our resources that work on that are resources that are PMI certified, so they're project managers first, who then learn the technology on top of that. So one of the pitfalls of working with organizations that aren't project server partners with Microsoft, more just technology partners, is that they can deploy the software to what they think are your specifications, but if they don't have a background in project management, they can't help you with those pitfalls that typically come from knowing and understanding the project portfolio management lifecycle. So for instance, our resources typically come with a minimum of 7 years of project management experience, have been PMI certified for over 7 years, and then we train them on the technology itself. We've developed questionnaires to help us through the process of evaluating what the requirements are, not only today, but also looking at and building sort of roadmap, because you don't necessarily want to go from where you are today to Z on the project portfolio management lifecycle and force all this change management across your organization. It will fail. It absolutely will fail. The only instance where I don't see that where it doesn't fail is if you've got the entire C-level of the organization on your side, forcing that down the chain of command, basically. But it's much easier, much more productive to take those baby steps of taking what you're doing today, automating that process, taking advantage of that process, and then growing. And I think I mentioned it earlier, with a tool, with a project portfolio management tool and an enterprise tool, you'll quickly see that when people are exposed to the information, they want more, and they're willing to do more for it. And it helps drive the governance process in the organization, providing it's a good tool that people like to use. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Other questions? Yes, sorry.
How do you guys assess the need for training in digital approach, right? So you have an average timeline for an organization.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of PMs. Think of an organization where there is a different level of skills of using, for example, a project with Microsoft.
Yeah.
So how would you guys ensure that adoption is going to be successful
Within the organization? So how do we ensure that it's not cookie cutter, one size fits all? So how do we ensure that that the adoption level will be appropriate, right? And I think you'll see that with a lot of the partners that are here today. Part of that process that we do is around evaluating what you're doing today, right? So as we sit down and talk with your organization around how you manage projects, if you're doing portfolio management, how you do portfolio management today, where the disconnects are, et cetera. What we do is put together what our recommended approach based on our experience. So for instance, from a project manager perspective, if they're using Excel today, you don't want to all of a sudden go off and force them to do, nth degree of detailed planning and resource management around those particular levels. It's more around, all right, let's take your resources and teach them how to use Microsoft Project, get them comfortable using the desktop tool. And then at some point, once you've gone through and sort of assessed their level of understanding with the tool, then we can start to move into more of an enterprise selection. So it's about building a roadmap for success within your organization. And your organization, you know your organization better than we do, but we've done hundreds of deployments and have seen what has drawn out success in these deployments and where we've had issues or come across stumbling blocks or roadblocks to those type of success. So it's not. We're not, I'll be honest with you, which I should always be honest with you, but sorry, it's more habit to say that. I say it more to my wife than I do anybody else, but no, I'll be honest with you, I don't like the food, which I cooked, trying to clean my name. But a lot of times when we meet with an organization, it isn't about getting that tool deployed right away. It's about making sure you're successful, because on the long term, if we go in there and we force this tool on you and it isn't successful, it doesn't win for you, it doesn't win for us, and it doesn't win for Microsoft, who we work very closely with. So, I think whether you talk to the Microsoft folks or you talk to any of the partners, they have done this over and over again. They have experience working with various levels of maturity within organizations and can help you build that roadmap to success throughout your organization based on where you are today and what your goals and objectives are for tomorrow. Other questions? Yes?
One of the charts at the beginning showed that projects with more than 2,400 man months,
Yep.
the value was essentially 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're going to a company that's primarily concerned with projects of that size, how do you tell them that your tool or this tool can address those issues?
Yeah.
How do they go about fixing that?
So the question is, when we look, we had a chart that said projects that were greater than 2,400 person months of effort. How do we go in and talk or address the fact that today 100% of those projects fail to meet the desired goals or outcomes or requirements, right? So what we do again is work with the organization, and there's multiple scenarios. If you're using the standalone application itself, that's a big piece of it, right? Because you're being more reactive to the information that's coming at you than proactive. And we talked about the ability to assign work to a resource and have them update you with where they are, and that gives you the opportunity to proactively manage what's going to happen next week, next month, try to mitigate some of the issues or risks that you're currently facing in the plan itself. So there's a number of different ways, depending on the scenario, depending on the way that they're managing. But the big piece here is around visibility, right? The ability to see what's coming at you and to tackle that head on instead of being surprised by it a week later in a meeting when you sit down and find out for the first time that a task that affects 2 other projects, part of this rolls up to this program, is now going to be delayed. And delayed in that type of scenario is typically not, I'm delayed a day. It's more like this is going to take weeks and weeks of additional effort that we didn't account for in the first place. It's all about transparency and the way that you're managing that business. Any other questions? The other thing, because I heard it a couple of times around success measures and how do you ensure success and how do you take that. One of the great things about the project server tool with 2010 is that you have the ability to manage projects with project on the desktop, but you also have the ability to manage projects using the web client. And we find that a lot of organizations that are going from a standalone application to a web application or to an enterprise application like to be able to use the web client. It's a lot easier to use. And even with the 2010 application with the ribbon, makes managing projects a lot easier. If you don't know where to find something, you're not going to use it. If you don't use it, you don't become comfortable with it, and you start to shy away from that. So exposing those pieces, those components or functions, both on the ribbon as well as in the web, give folks a stronger level of comfort with that. And then we also recommend, obviously, training to get your project managers more comfortable. The more comfortable they are, the more they're going to use it. The more they use it, the more they're going to like it. The more they like it, the more you're going to get out of it as well, right? I don't have the slide up here. It shows what goes in is amplified by what comes out of the solution, right? So bad data in, bad data out, because I'm being recorded. But that's the key to that, right? Is making sure the project managers especially the project managers, are comfortable with using the tool, so that they'll use it more. And the more they use it, the more comfortable they come, the more they'll start to use it and provide more levels of maturity and functionality in your tool, in your environment. So I see people coming in, so I want to thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I appreciate your staying with me. Thank you.